Welcome to Hot Soup Stories. The Imperial kitchen was a world apart from the splendor of the palace. Outside its heavy wooden doors, silk robes swirled, whispered intrigues floated in the corridors, and the emperor's laughter echoed like music across the halls. Inside, the air was thick with steam, the sharp tang of spices, and the constant, rhythmic clatter of knives against cutting boards. Here she was invisible. Her name was Lionhua. Though her skin was fair and her eyes bright, she wore no delicate jewelry, no embroidered gowns, no elaborate hairpins. She wore the plain, practical garb of a kitchen maid, a life of service, shadows, and silence. In the hierarchy of the palace, she was considered nothing, an unseen hand that chopped vegetables, kneaded dough, and stirred simmering pots. Yet beneath the quiet humility there burned a spark of irrepressible wit, sharper than any knife she wielded. Every morning she arrived before the sun broke through the palace eaves. The other servants moved in a practiced mechanical rhythm, their faces set and their tongues silent. Conversation was discouraged. Even the smallest laugh or smile drew the sharpest reprimand from the head cook, an unforgiving woman who measured competence by obedience rather than skill. Lionhue, however, had learned early to conceal her humor behind a calm expression, letting it simmer quietly like the stocks she prepared. The emperor, an enigmatic man whose moods shifted as quickly as the weather, was known to punish those who sought favor too eagerly. His concubines, all trained to please with grace, beauty, or melodious laughter, would risk his wrath if they overstepped. And yet in this strict and suffocating world, Lionhue discovered a loophole. The kitchen was invisible, the laughter forbidden, but no law said she could not infuse a meal with subtle cleverness. Her opportunity came each time she prepared dishes for the emperor. She had mastered the art of subtlety. A hint of spiced sweetness in a dumpling became a playful metaphor for indulgence. A delicate swirl of sauce across a plate was her signature, a silent wink to those who could read it. And sometimes, when she added a pinch of an unusual herb, she whispered a clever rhyme to herself under her breath, watching with delight as the flavors danced and the emperor's expression flickered imperceptibly with amusement. It was during one such morning that her experiment bore fruit. Lionhua was rolling dough for steamed buns when the head cook barked, "Mind your speed, girl, the emperor's breakfast waits." Her hands never faltered, but her mind was already weaving a quiet jest into the dish. She kneaded the dough and muttered a line under her breath. Even a palace full of silence can't hush a good laugh. No one heard her, and that was the point. By the time the emperor took his first bite, the combination of soft bun, sweet bean paste, and a hint of cinnamon made him pause. His lips twitched and a low, amused chuckle escaped before he could stop it. The head cook, horrified by any trace of improper behavior in the emperor, looked around, her eyes wide. Lionhua, for her part, kept kneading, her expression perfectly neutral, as if nothing had happened. She felt a thrill that had nothing to do with praise or recognition. This was hers alone, a secret victory in a world that sought to suppress her entirely. Outside the kitchen, the palace was waking. Concubines in embroidered silks preened before mirrors, practicing smiles and polite laughter. They did not know that somewhere beyond their gilded walls, laughter had been sparked, not by performance but by cleverness and subtlety. Lionhue observed them sometimes when deliveries carried her into the grand halls. Their forced gaiety, their exaggerated gestures, and their constant attention to status made her lips twitch in quiet amusement. She had long since learned that survival in the palace required invisibility. Those who shone too brightly, even with talent or humor, were often extinguished. And yet she also understood something others had forgot. Influence could be quiet, like water under stone. A single well-placed flavor, a hint of cleverness at the right moment, could ripple through the rigid palace hierarchy without anyone ever noticing the source. That afternoon, she prepared the emperor's main meal. While the head cook hovered like a hawk, Lionhua arranged vegetables into shapes that suggested clouds drifting across a mountain valley. Tiny, almost imperceptible puns were woven into each dish, a secret language only the keenest observer could detect. When the emperor tasted his food, he paused again, the corners of his mouth twitching upward. The head cook, unaware of the invisible play unfolding before her, scolded the sous chefs for allowing the emperor to smile without reason. Lionhua returned to her corner, hands washed, eyes bright with quiet triumph. She knew that favor in the palace could not be won through beauty alone, nor through laughter that was forced and loud. True power, the kind that went unnoticed yet shaped the day, was subtle, clever, and careful. As the sun dipped below the palace walls, Lionhua cleaned her station and arranged her knives with meticulous care. The kitchen quieted, servants retreating to their rooms, leaving her alone with the scent of spices and simmering soups. And in that stillness, she whispered again to herself, "A laugh is forbidden, yet I am free. Let the palace chase the empty ones, I have the secret." The day ended, but the game had begun. Somewhere in the quiet chambers of the emperor, her subtle humor had planted a seed. and though the palace rules forbade recognition, Lionhua knew that influence, like a hidden flame, could grow in shadows until it illuminated the entire court. The day began like any other in the palace, with a pale sun casting long shadows across the marble halls, but for Lionhua it was different. There was a subtle tension in the air, a sense that her quiet little joke from the morning had not gone unnoticed. She moved through the kitchen with her usual precision, chopping, stirring, and tasting, while her mind replayed the moment the emperor had chuckled at her cinnamon-infused bun. That single, low laugh, so brief that the head cook had barely noticed, had ignited a thrill she could not deny. Humor, after all, was a dangerous weapon in a place built on rigid decorum, and yet, for once, it had worked. Lionhua called the head cook sharply, breaking her thoughts. "Be careful with the ginger sauce, you remember last week's mishap." "Yes, head cook," she replied, bowing slightly. Her voice was calm, even, but inside her mind raced. Every dish she prepared today had to maintain her cover while still carrying that hidden spark, just enough to catch the emperor's attention again. When the tray of breakfast was delivered to the emperor's private chamber, Lionhua lingered in the doorway. Ostensibly waiting to see if everything was acceptable, she could hear the clink of chopsticks against porcelain, the faint hum of palace attendants moving in the shadows. Then it came, a soft, almost imperceptible laugh. She froze, heart leaping. Not a scolding, not a sigh of annoyance, but a genuine, delighted chuckle. The emperor was laughing at something in his meal, and she knew with certainty it was her subtle addition, the playful swirl of cinnamon that had carried a little riddle only he could appreciate. For a moment the world narrowed to that sound, echoing in her mind like a melody she had never expected to hear. Then the emperor spoke softly, almost to himself. "Who prepared this?" The attendants exchanged glances. Lionhua knew the rules, no one could answer unless summoned. But then a hand waved subtly from the shadow near the door, the head cook, ever vigilant yet oblivious to the source of the amusement. The emperor's eyes flicked to her face, searching, curious but not accusing. "Have the same meal prepared for tomorrow," he murmured, almost contemplatively, "and see that it is the same." Lionhua bowed, her lips barely twitching in a smile. She returned to the kitchen, her steps light, her mind buzzing. The emperor had noticed. By noon, word had begun to spread through the corridors, though nothing was said openly. The concubines, adorned in silks of emerald and ruby, were already discussing the emperor's sudden amusement. "Did you see him laugh this morning?" one whispered to another in the privacy of her chamber. "Yes," replied another, her voice tight with jealousy. "He has not laughed so since the festival. I wonder who made him so pleased." No one suspected the plain, quiet maid in the kitchen. And Lionhua, as she carried steaming bowls of soup and trays of fragrant buns, allowed herself the smallest internal smile. Let them wonder, let them scheme, none of them could understand the subtlety of her craft. In the afternoon, as she peeled vegetables for the evening meal, a young attendant entered the kitchen, cheeks flushed with excitement. "The emperor, he requests your presence tomorrow," she said breathlessly. Lionhua froze. "My presence," she repeated carefully, keeping her tone neutral. "Yes," he said personally. The attendant's eyes darted toward the head cook, who was nearby and busy inspecting dumplings. "He said he wants the one who prepared the cinnamon buns." A thrill shot through Lionhua. This was unexpected. The emperor did not summon kitchen staff lightly, and yet she understood immediately he was curious, perhaps intrigued, perhaps in his own quiet way amused by her wit. She nodded silently, already planning. Tomorrow's meal would be more than a dish, it would be a careful performance, a secret dialogue between her and the emperor. Humor, carefully hidden in flavor and presentation, was a language they would share alone. Later, as the palace corridors filled with the whispers of concubines practicing forced smiles and polite laughter, Lionhua quietly observed. Their attempts to mimic the charm she had unwittingly sparked were clumsy, awkward, and unconvincing. One of them, a young consort with a penchant for dramatics, tried to joke with the emperor's attendant about the delights of court life, and the result was a stilted, uncomfortable silence. Lionhua's lips curved in quiet amusement. Let them try. Let them fail. Night fell, and the kitchen emptied except for Lionhua. She cleaned her station, folding cloths and arranging knives with meticulous care. The moonlight spilled through the small window, casting silver streaks across the counters. She allowed herself one whispered thought. The first laugh is the hardest, the first connection the sweetest. And somewhere in the distant, silk-draped chambers of the emperor he was already anticipating tomorrow's meal. Unbeknownst to the palace, a subtle game had begun, one of humor, cunning, and invisible power. And Lionhua, hidden in plain sight, held the first, quiet advantage. The next morning, the palace was alive with its usual rigid rhythm, servants scurrying, concubines practicing smiles, eunuchs hurrying to fulfill endless requests. Yet for Lionhua, the day held a different air: anticipation, tension, and the thrill of a secret that could unravel or empower her. She arrived in the kitchen before dawn as always and set about preparing the ingredients. Every chop of the knife, every swirl of sauce, every careful kneading of dough was a calculated act. Today, she knew the emperor would taste her work personally. Lionhua called the head cook, her voice sharp. "The emperor expects perfection, do not surprise him." "Yes, head cook," Lionhua said calmly, though her mind was alive with subtle strategies. Perfection in this case was merely the baseline. She had to weave in her humor without detection, her cleverness hidden in plain sight. When the meal was presented, the emperor sat in the quiet of his private dining chamber. His eyes, dark and alert, followed the servants as they set the dishes before him. Lionhua, standing at a respectful distance, watched him closely, noting every twitch of the lips, every faint sparkle in his eyes. He picked up a piece of her carefully steamed bun, bit into it, and paused, his expression betraying a flicker of amusement. A low, unrestrained chuckle escaped him this time, more deliberate, more delighted than before. "This is clever," he murmured softly, almost to himself. "Who prepared this?" The attendants hesitated. Lionhua kept her posture calm, her expression unreadable though her heart raced. The emperor's gaze lingered on her, not accusing, not commanding, but curious, probing, almost playful. "You," he said, his voice quiet yet with unmistakable authority, "you prepared this." Lionhua bowed respectfully. "Yes, your majesty," she said. Her tone was neutral, obedient, but inside, a spark of exhilaration burned. He knew, and he knew her, at least enough to recognize the hand behind the humor. "Come to my study tomorrow," he said, "not as a kitchen maid but for guidance on meals." Guidance, such a word seemed harmless, yet it carried immense weight. Lionhua understood its implication. He wanted her personally and secretly. No one would know, no one would suspect, but in that quiet summons she held power. For the rest of the day, she moved through the kitchen with a new sense of purpose. Every ingredient, every spice, every subtle garnish became a potential message, a carefully placed joke, a secret thread connecting her to the emperor's attention. She began to plan not just meals but subtle conversations, playful riddles hidden in flavor, the kind that could amuse without revealing her intentions to the court. Meanwhile, whispers in the palace corridors began to take shape. The concubines had noticed a change. One of the younger consorts, a woman known for her sharp tongue but shallow charm, muttered to her companion, "Have you seen him? He is different this morning. He smiles for reasons no one understands." "Yes," the companion replied, voice tinged with envy. "Perhaps it is the kitchen staff. Surely it is impossible that a lowly maid could delight the emperor." Impossible indeed, but not for Lionhua. She continued her work, quietly observing the petty rivalries and jealous schemes forming among the silks and jewels. They did not see her as a competitor, nor did they understand that humor, clever, subtle humor, could hold influence greater than beauty, greater than status. The evening arrived, and the palace buzzed with the tension of unseen machinations. Lionhua's meals were prepared with extraordinary care, each dish a tapestry of flavor, wit, and silent jest. The emperor, receiving them in private, laughed again, softly, indulgently, as if he had discovered a hidden world of delight. He began to converse with her during these private moments, not openly, not in front of anyone else, but quietly, with subtle cues and questions. He asked about the choice of spices, the pairing of textures, and sometimes innocently about her thoughts on palace life. Lionhua responded carefully, never overstepping, always weaving her humor into her answers. A playful metaphor here, a gentle tease there. Each time he laughed quietly, privately, yet the connection between them deepened. Outside, in the corridors, rival concubines tried to emulate what they believed to be the source of the emperor's amusement. One attempted a witty remark in his presence, only to be met with polite indifference. Another tried a clever anecdote which fell flat and drew suppressed giggles from her attendants. Their failures were loud, obvious, and embarrassing. Lionhua, unseen and unnoticed, observed it all with a sense of quiet satisfaction. Influence, she thought, was never about imitation. True power lay in subtlety, in knowing how to speak, or in her case, how to make someone laugh without revealing the hand that guided them. That night, as she returned to her quarters, she reflected on the day's events. The Emperor's interest was no longer accidental, it was deliberate, and she understood for the first time the delicate balance she must maintain. Publicly, she remained invisible, a kitchen maid without standing. Privately, she had become a confidant, a secret presence that shaped the Emperor's day with nothing more than cleverness and subtle humor. And in that quiet realization, Lionhua smiled softly to herself. The game had begun in earnest. No one must see me, yet all are affected by me. The palace may continue to chase empty charm, but I hold the true key. The palace corridors were alive with whispers, the rustle of silk, and the quiet hum of rivalry. The emperor's private chuckle at breakfast had not gone unnoticed, and though he had made no declaration, the concubines had begun to sense that something, or someone, had captured his interest. It was impossible to ignore. Every day they observed him entering the dining chamber with a subtle gleam in his eye, lingering over meals that seemed ordinary but carried a hidden delight. Rumors began to circulate, and as always, the palace's hierarchy thrived on competition. The concubines' ornaments of beauty and status were determined to find the source of the emperor's amusement. "Have you noticed how he smiles whenever a certain tray arrives?" whispered Consort Yan, a woman whose hair was always arranged like a nest of golden threads. "Surely it must be something extraordinary. We cannot let another remain in secret favor." "It must be one of the kitchen girls," replied a younger consort, her voice sharp with envy. "But who? Surely one of us would know. Perhaps it is cleverness or a trick of chance." The word trick alone ignited their competitive instincts. The idea that an invisible kitchen maid could outperform them in charm and cleverness was unbearable. Their beauty, grace, and cultivated manners were supposed to be the instruments of favor, not subtle jokes hidden in buns and sauces. And so, they resolved to act. The next morning, as Lionhua worked silently at her station, she noticed the concubines arriving at the kitchen entrance, not by invitation but by audacious curiosity. They wore elaborate silks and ornaments that sparkled even under the dim light of the kitchen, and their smiles were sharp, rehearsed. "Good morning," Consort Yan began, tilting her head with a practiced charm. "We thought perhaps you might show us how you create these delightful dishes. We would love to learn." Lionhua's eyes flickered briefly, betraying a hint of amusement. She bowed slightly. "The recipes are simple, Your Highnesses," she said softly. "It is not technique but attention to small details that matters most." The concubines exchanged glances, barely disguising their impatience. They had no interest in learning technique. They were here to steal influence, to mimic what they assumed was the source of the emperor's private amusement. As they attempted to imitate Lionhua, disaster followed. One consort sprinkled too much sugar on a steamed bun, creating a crust so hard it cracked loudly when broken, producing a hollow clang that echoed embarrassingly across the kitchen. Another added chili in a delicate sauce, thinking it clever, but the result was unbearably spicy, a dish that sent the head cook rushing for water. Lionhua watched quietly, the corners of her lips tugged in a restrained smile. "Perhaps a lighter hand," Lionhua suggested softly, her tone polite, yet every word was a subtle lesson they failed to grasp. The concubines' attempts at humor were worse. One tried to make a pun about the emperor's fondness for dumplings, only to stumble over her words and create a phrase that sounded absurd. Another told a story about palace life, attempting to weave wit into narrative, but it came out stilted and awkward, drawing suppressed snickers from the kitchen attendants. Lionhua observed in quiet amusement, understanding the lesson the palace had yet to learn. Humor, subtlety, and timing could not be faked. One could not force laughter or favor. It was earned in secret, hidden in plain sight, and discovered only by those clever enough to notice. Meanwhile, the emperor, unaware of the concubines' blunders, continued to enjoy his private meals prepared by Lionhua. He noticed the subtle improvements in flavor, the clever little touches she added, and the understated humor embedded in the presentation. With each meal, his admiration for her intelligence grew, not just for her culinary skill, but for the quiet courage it took to amuse him under the watchful eyes of the palace. Outside, gossip swirled like smoke. The concubines' failures became the subject of quiet ridicule among attendants who whispered about their awkward attempts at charm. Lionhua, invisible to all but the emperor, felt a secret thrill. They were so eager to shine, yet they had no understanding of the power of subtlety. That evening, after the kitchen had been cleaned and the last tray delivered, Lionhua reflected on the day. The concubines had tried to imitate her brilliance and failed spectacularly, highlighting the difference between forced performance and genuine cleverness. She cleaned her knives, carefully arranged her station, and whispered to herself, "Let them try to compete. Let them stumble over their own vanity. Invisibility is my shield, wit my weapon, and laughter my secret triumph." And somewhere in the palace, behind gilded screens and closed doors, the emperor's private laughter continued, soft, warm, and entirely hers to inspire. The palace was at its usual bustling pace, yet for Lionhua a quiet tension hummed in the air. The emperor's interest, once subtle, had grown deliberate. Each day his eyes lingered a moment longer over her dishes. Each day his private chuckle became a welcome signal that he sought not just food but companionship, though never publicly, never openly. The morning began with steam rising from the cauldrons and the scent of ginger and garlic filling the kitchen. Lionhua moved with her customary precision, but now there was an undercurrent of expectation. Today the emperor would come himself. She felt it as surely as one senses a storm approaching, the soft shiver of anticipation running through her spine. "Lionhua," called the head cook, her voice sharp, "make sure every dish is perfect. The emperor has his favorites and one mistake could—" "Yes, head cook," Lionhua interrupted politely, hiding the thrill in her chest. She did not need perfection alone today, she needed subtlety, timing, and wit. When the emperor entered the kitchen, the room seemed to shrink around him. His robes, dark and flowing, brushed softly against the polished floors. The eunuchs trailed behind, yet their presence was muted by the power he carried effortlessly. His eyes, sharp and dark, found hers immediately, and for a heartbeat the world seemed to stop. "You," he said softly, ignoring the head cook's flustered bow, "come here, I wish to see how these meals are prepared." Lionhua approached, her hands folded respectfully. "Yes, your majesty," she replied, her voice calm though her heart raced. He observed silently as she demonstrated the preparation of a delicate fish dish. He asked questions, not about flavor but about her choice of combination, the thought behind textures, and occasionally the subtle hints of humor she embedded. "What inspired this garnish?" he asked, holding a tiny leaf delicately with chopsticks. Lionhua's mind raced. A reply had to be careful, revealing too much risked attention, too little could appear as arrogance. "It is meant to resemble clouds drifting over the palace gardens, your majesty," she said softly, a subtle hint of serenity perhaps to lighten the weight of the day. The emperor's lips curved, a quiet smile tugging at the corners. "And yet, there is a touch of mischief here, I can sense it." Lionhua's heart skipped. Her small jokes, hidden in spice and arrangement, were recognized. She nodded slightly, her expression neutral, giving nothing away. Over the next few hours, they moved through dishes, each conversation a delicate dance. Lionhua's humor was measured, her wit careful, while the emperor's responses were playful, teasing, and utterly sincere. The distance between them shrank invisibly, leaving only a private connection that no one else could breach. Meanwhile, the palace murmurs grew louder. The concubines, ever vigilant, sensed something shifting. Their own failed attempts at humor had not gone unnoticed, and envy began to bloom like a poisonous flower. Consort Yan whispered to a companion, "He spends more time with the kitchen maid than with any of us. Surely there is some favor here, some secret we must discover." The companion shook her head. "But she is nothing, a servant, we must tread carefully, to confront her would be reckless." Yet recklessness and jealousy often go hand in hand in the palace. The concubines' schemes, subtle at first, grew bolder, their envy simmering like a hidden fire. Lionhua, for her part, continued her work with serene focus, aware of the danger but undeterred. Days passed and the emperor's private visits became routine. Sometimes he would arrive at unexpected hours, a subtle way of testing her readiness, her creativity, and her discretion. Other times he observed silently as she worked, allowing her to guide him through the choices she made in flavor, presentation, and hidden humor. Each encounter was an intimate game, a private world where they could speak through cleverness, gesture, and taste alone. The thrill of their clandestine connection was not without risk. Each visit required utmost discretion. Servants, eunuchs, and concubines alike could never suspect the growing bond. Yet Lionhua felt alive in a way the shadows of the kitchen had never allowed. The power of invisibility, paired with subtle influence, was intoxicating. And so in quiet corners of the imperial kitchen, laughter and wit became their secret currency. The emperor's chuckle was no longer accidental, it was sought, anticipated, and carefully treasured. Lion Hua had discovered a truth few in the palace understood. Influence was not always loud, favor was not always visible, and humor, hidden, clever, and well-timed, could bind hearts in ways wealth, beauty, and power never could. That night, as the last dishes were cleared and the kitchen emptied, Lion Hua lingered by the window, looking out at the moonlit palace gardens. She whispered softly to herself, "Close enough to be seen, yet hidden enough to remain free. Let them envy, let them scheme. I hold the laughter in my hands and the emperor follows it." In the quiet shadows, her secret favor was no longer a possibility, it was reality. The palace, usually a realm of quiet elegance, now buzzed with invisible tension. Rumors had spread like wildfire. The emperor's amusement, once a private pleasure, had become the subject of hushed speculation among the concubines. Whispers twisted around hallways, dripping with envy and suspicion. Consort Yan, frustrated and humiliated by her repeated failures to imitate the secret source of the emperor's laughter, devised a plan. She would uncover the truth, or at least, she thought she would. "Tomorrow," she whispered to a trusted attendant, her eyes cold with determination, "I will expose her. This maid cannot hide forever. If she has gained the emperor's favor, we will reveal it, and I will claim the glory that is rightly mine." The trap was simple, yet devious. A banquet was to be held for visiting dignitaries, and the emperor, known for his refined taste, would attend personally. Consort Yan arranged for Lion Hua to be accidentally summoned to the hall under the pretense of delivering the dishes herself. Hidden among the silks and silk-trained attendants, cameras of opportunity wait, palace observers would witness her presence, and she would be revealed as the source of the subtle laughter. The next morning, Lion Hua moved through her duties unaware of the plot, preparing dishes with her usual care and attention to detail. Every swirl of sauce and carefully placed garnish carried her signature wit, now elevated with a delicate balance of charm and artistry. She imagined the emperor tasting each bite and chuckled softly to herself, knowing that subtlety was her strongest ally. By afternoon, the banquet was underway. The hall gleamed with lanterns, the floors polished until the marble reflected the ornate ceiling. Dignitaries from distant kingdoms whispered among themselves, admiring the palace's grandeur, while the concubines moved like delicate ornaments, each attempting to appear more graceful and clever than the other. Lion Hua was summoned, as planned by Consort Yan, to deliver a tray of delicate appetizers. Her heart skipped a beat, sensing an unusual tension in the air, yet she remained composed. Every step, every bow was measured. Every glance at the emperor was polite and unobtrusive. Consort Yan's eyes glinted with anticipation, thinking the moment of exposure was near. The emperor took a delicate bite of the dish and then, a subtle pause. His expression, calm and unreadable, betrayed nothing to the assembled crowd. "Delicious," he said softly, his eyes meeting Lion Hua's with a hint of amusement. "Extraordinary." A hush fell over the hall as everyone sought the source of this praise. Consort Yan's lips tightened. She had expected recognition, a stumble, a sign that Lion Hua's secret influence would be revealed. But the emperor, ever subtle, did not announce the truth. He merely allowed Lion Hua to retreat quietly to her station, her composure intact. The tension in the hall broke in a quiet ripple. The dignitaries, distracted by the flavors, did not notice the small drama that had unfolded. The concubines, frustrated, could only exchange uneasy glances, their plot foiled not by luck but by the emperor's deliberate discretion. Back in the kitchen, Lion Hua paused, wiping her hands. She allowed herself a quiet smile. The trap had been laid, and yet she had navigated it unscathed. Subtlety had saved her. Later, in the privacy of the emperor's chamber, he spoke softly, leaning closer to Lion Hua. "You handled that well," he murmured, almost a whisper. "Your discretion is remarkable." Lion Hua's heart fluttered. "It is nothing, Your Majesty," she replied, her voice calm, hiding the rush of pride and relief. "Merely careful attention." "No," he said, his eyes dark with admiration, "it is much more. Intelligence, wit, humor, and courage, qualities many in the palace believed to be inseparable from status, yet here you stand, invisible and unrivaled." The words filled her with a quiet warmth. Invisibility had become her armor, subtlety her weapon, and humor her shield. The palace could plot, the concubines could scheme, but none could touch her, not yet and perhaps not ever. That night, as she cleaned her station under the pale moonlight streaming through the kitchen window, Lion Hua whispered softly to herself, The trap came, yet I remain unseen. Let them seek and fail. Influence is not given, it is earned in silence. And in that silence, her laughter, hidden, clever, and forbidden, continued to echo, unseen by all except the one who truly mattered. The palace glittered under the morning sun, its halls reflecting the brilliance of silk, gold, and polished marble. Today was the annual festival honoring the empire's ancestors, a day when the emperor appeared publicly among his concubines, ministers, and visiting dignitaries. The courtyard buzzed with activity, and the air was thick with the scent of incense and fresh flowers. Lionhua moved quietly through the kitchen, her presence unremarkable to all around her. Servants hurried past, carrying steaming dishes, while concubines arranged their elaborate silks and perfumed themselves with care, each vying for a fragment of attention that would never reach her. She was invisible, but invisibility had its own power. The banquet tables were arranged under the open sky, adorned with fruits, flowers, and the finest porcelains. Lionhua's dishes were to be served to the emperor and the assembled guests. As she placed the final tray before the head attendant, she allowed herself a subtle moment of satisfaction. Every garnish, every swirl of sauce, every hidden combination of flavor was a quiet message, a private joke woven into the meal. The emperor arrived, a figure of commanding presence, yet his eyes scanned the table with amusement and appreciation. As he tasted the dishes, his gaze lingered on Lionhua for a fleeting moment, a private acknowledgement invisible to everyone else. The concubines, who had spent hours rehearsing smiles and witty gestures, were oblivious. They could not see the delicate humor hidden in the food, nor the way the emperor's lips curved with quiet delight. One of the concubines, eager to capture attention, tried to emulate the clever touches she imagined Lionhua had employed. She pointed to a piece of fruit and made an awkward pun about the emperor's reign, hopping for laughter. Instead, the room fell silent for a heartbeat, and the emperor's polite nod barely disguised his indifference. The concubine flushed crimson, her eyes darting nervously, while the attendants exchanged barely restrained giggles. Lionhua, standing in the shadows, allowed herself a quiet smile. Forced charm and imitation could never match subtle intelligence and genuine wit. Her invisibility, far from being a disadvantage, protected her, allowing her influence to ripple quietly, unnoticed by those who would seek to claim it. As the festival progressed, dignitaries complimented the emperor on the feast, praising the flavors, presentation, and innovation. He nodded graciously, yet his private satisfaction was reserved for the one who truly understood the language of his palate. Lionhua, in the kitchen's quiet corner, imagined his subtle chuckle and felt a thrill. She had won the first round of a game no one else even knew they were playing. Later, in the privacy of his chambers, the emperor spoke to her directly. "Today your dishes shone even among the grandest of praise," he said softly. "The court may never know why they delight me, but I do, and that is enough." Lionhua's heart lifted at his words. She bowed respectfully, hiding the warmth that surged within. "I am honored, Your Majesty," she said, careful to maintain the propriety expected of her station. Yet in her chest she felt the quiet thrill of triumph. Influence, after all, did not need recognition to exist, it needed only cleverness, timing, and discretion. Outside, the concubines seethed. Consort Yan muttered to her companions, "How is it that the emperor delights in the dishes of a kitchen maid yet pays no notice to our efforts?" One of the younger consorts shook her head. "It is impossible. No one of such low status could inspire favor. There must be some trick, some hidden scheme." The palace was filled with whispers, envy, and quiet scheming, but none could touch Lionhua. Her power lay in invisibility, subtlety, and the secret language she shared with the emperor alone. That night, as she cleaned her station and polished the knives to a mirror finish, she whispered softly to herself, "They see nothing, they understand nothing. And yet, through subtlety and wit, I shape the day, I guide the mind, I win laughter without ever being seen." Outside the kitchen, the palace glittered with the grandeur of performance, the pride of visible achievement. But Lionhua's quiet triumph, hidden in flavor and laughter, remained unchallenged, untouchable, and entirely hers. The palace had grown restless. The concubines' whispered suspicions had not waned, if anything, their envy had intensified. Yet despite their schemes, despite the endless maneuvering of status and silk, Lionhua's quiet influence continued to grow. Her power was invisible, subtle, and entirely untouchable, but it was real. It began with small decisions. One afternoon, the emperor requested a tea service unlike any she had prepared before, a complex arrangement of flavors and fragrances designed to accompany a discussion with foreign envoys. Lionhua approached the task not merely as a kitchen maid but as a strategist. Each herb, each delicate infusion was a carefully placed gesture. A hint of jasmine soothed tension, a whisper of mint invigorated the mind. Hidden in the subtlety of flavor, she wove a language only he could understand, a gentle counsel through culinary craft. When the emperor tasted the tea, he nodded appreciatively. "You understand more than just taste," he said softly. "You understand the mind, the mood, the people. Tell me, Lionhua, have you always observed so carefully?" She bowed, careful not to overstep. "Only enough to serve well, your majesty," she replied. Yet in her mind she knew the truth, observation and wit were her weapons, subtlety was her power. Soon others in the palace began to notice something was shifting. Certain decisions, once rigid and impersonal, seemed influenced by the emperor's quiet satisfaction after her meals. Courtiers whispered that the emperor's mood had improved, his judgments more measured, and that he laughed more often even in council chambers, though no one could discern the source. Lionhua's hand unseen guided events through the most delicate of channels, humor, cleverness, and insight hidden in taste. Meanwhile, the concubines became restless and reckless. Consort Yan, humiliated repeatedly by her own failures to gain attention, attempted to confront Lionhua directly. She approached the kitchen one afternoon, her silks rustling like a storm, eyes blazing. "You," she hissed, "how is it that the emperor smiles at your dishes and ignores us? Explain yourself." Lionhua, folding dumplings with her usual precision, looked up slowly. Her expression was serene, polite, and utterly unreadable. "I serve only to please your highness," she said softly. "I do not seek attention." "You lie," Consort Yan spat, her voice trembling with fury. "There is some trick, some secret favor you hide." Lionhua's lips curved in a faint, quiet smile, almost imperceptible. "Perhaps," she said, "the favor is not in what one seeks but in what is given without expectation." Consort Yan stared at her, bewildered. There was no trap, no trick, only a quiet intelligence and humility she could neither understand nor manipulate. Lionhua returned to her work, calm and untouchable, leaving Consort Yan simmering in frustration. That evening the emperor visited her personally as he often did now. "You have a rare gift," he murmured, watching her arrange a delicate plate of steamed vegetables. "Many seek to charm, to dazzle, to be seen. You influence quietly yet profoundly. I admire that." Lionhua's heart fluttered. His acknowledgement, though private, was worth more than all the recognition the concubines could claim. She bowed respectfully. "It is an honor, your majesty," she said, hiding the surge of pride behind calm composure. "Do not let them unsettle you," he said softly, his dark eyes warm with quiet affection. "Let them fail in vanity, let them stumble in their attempts. True power is subtle and you understand it better than anyone here." Lionhua allowed herself a quiet thought as she returned to her station. Influence, laughter, subtlety, these were her true weapons. No one in the palace could touch her, and yet through her craft she had shaped the emperor's favor, his laughter, and even the mood of the court itself. As night fell over the palace, Lionhua looked out of the small kitchen window at the moonlit gardens. In her hands rested the secret of her power, invisible yet undeniable. And somewhere in the silent corridors, the emperor's thoughts and judgments were quietly guided by her wit, insight, and cleverness, an invisible bond stronger than silk or gold. "Let them envy, let them plot, I remain unseen, yet my influence shapes the day. Laughter is my weapon and subtlety is my shield." The palace had never been quieter. Behind the glittering silks and polished marble halls, tension hummed faintly like a thread stretched taut. The concubines whispered endlessly about the source of the emperor's private delight, their envy sharp and poisonous. Yet none could touch Lionhua, whose quiet mastery of humor, subtlety, and insight had rendered her invisible yet infinitely powerful. The morning sun spilled through the kitchen windows as Lionhua arranged her ingredients with her usual care. Each vegetable, each herb, each carefully folded dumpling was part of a language no one else could understand. The emperor's favor, though secret, had grown more deliberate. He sought her company, her insights, her subtle humor, not as a servant, not as a plaything, but as an equal in wit and cleverness. Today was no ordinary day. A council of ministers had gathered in the palace hall to discuss new policies and edicts. The concubines, glittering in silk and adorned with jewels, positioned themselves carefully, hopping for a fleeting moment of attention. Lionhua's role was simple: prepare the emperor's meal, yet even this task had become an art of influence. Every flavor, every subtle arrangement carried a hidden message: clarity, patience, insight. When the emperor tasted her meal, he paused, a quiet smile playing across his lips. His eyes met hers, and for a moment the entire court, minister, concubine, and servant alike faded into the background. The emperor's private approval, subtle and invisible, was the only recognition that mattered. In the hall, rival concubines tried one last time to imitate her charm. One attempted a jest about the council's debates, another performed an awkward flourish with a fan hopping to capture attention. Both failed spectacularly. Their forced humor rang hollow, drawing only polite smiles or discreet stifled laughter. Meanwhile, Lionhue's influence was undeniable. Every decision the emperor made seemed guided by her subtle counsel, hidden in flavors, textures, and silent observation. Later, the emperor called her privately to his chambers. "You have changed the rhythm of this palace," he said softly. "Not through beauty, not through spectacle, but through insight, wit, and the courage to remain unseen. Few could achieve this, yet you do, quietly, effortlessly." Lionhue abode respectfully, hiding the warmth surging in her chest. "It is nothing, your majesty," she replied, calm and obedient. Yet in her mind, she acknowledged the truth. She had found a way to wield influence without recognition, to shape the court's moods and the emperor's favor through cleverness alone. "Do you understand," he continued, his dark eyes meeting hers, "that in your invisibility you have become more powerful than all who seek recognition?" "Yes, your majesty," she said softly, her lips curving in the faintest, secret smile. In the days that followed, the palace settled into a new order. The concubines, humbled by repeated failures, grew quieter, their envy simmering beneath polished smiles. Lionhue, still a humble kitchen maid in appearance, continued to craft her dishes with precision, subtlety, and wit. The emperor's private laughter became a daily ritual, a silent acknowledgement, a secret bond between two minds who understood one another beyond words. No one could claim her favor, no one could replicate her cleverness, no one could break the invisible thread connecting her wit to the emperor's delight. She had discovered the truth of power. It did not need to be seen to exist, and it did not need to be declared to be respected. At night, as she cleaned the last bowls and polished her knives, she whispered to herself softly, "The laughter is mine, forbidden yet free. The palace sees nothing, yet all is touched. I am unseen and therefore invincible." And somewhere in his chambers the emperor chuckled quietly, privately, knowing that the one who wielded true influence in his court did so with intelligence, subtlety, and wit, hidden in plain sight, untouchable, and entirely her own. Invisibility had become her strength, humor her language, and secrecy her power. The palace would continue its dances of jealousy, envy, and ambition, but Lionhue's laughter, clever, forbidden, and perfectly timed, would remain beyond reach, the quiet crown of a woman who had mastered the art of unseen influence. The game was over. She had won not with beauty nor status nor forced charm, but with cleverness, discretion, and laughter. And in her victory, the palace itself seemed to bow silently to the one who had learned to be invisible and yet utterly indispensable.
Thanks for tuning in to Hot Soup Stories. If you love audio stories, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your encouragement keeps our stories coming.